discuss this are Paul Massaro, who is a senior policy advisor to the Helsinki Commission, and Dean Starkman, senior editor at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, who obtained the files and spent 2 years sifting through them. Dean, let's start with you. Just talk us through what you believe this vast leak of documents has revealed.
In a word, it's revealed a secret parallel financial system, basically designed for and available to only the rich and powerful, that allows them to avoid taxes, hide assets, escape accountability, and basically live by rules, different rules from the rest of us. And the harms and the social ills that emanate from that are many, and the knowledge that the public has about this system is scant. And I think it's important that the public fully understand the scale, the scope, and the breadth of the system, and the ubiquity of its presence all around the world, in every country, and essentially every world leader, all corners of the world, and all major financial centers.
Were you surprised by any of it? I mean, you mentioned the scale of it. Were you surprised by the scale of it?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that distinguishes this leak from its predecessors, including the Panama Papers, which was a landmark for ICIJ and came out in 2016, is the scale. I mean, what you're looking at are what Panama Papers did was sort of open a crack in the wall of secrecy in the offshore system. But the Pandora Papers, for me, sort of blows the whole wall apart. We can see it in its wholeness and its fullness of the system. We have 330 public officials. That's a conservative number. 35 current and former world leaders. It's just a whole class of people who have access to the system that's not available to the rest of us, that has been poorly understood and has resulted in all sorts of ills, including the draining of tax dollars from legitimate democracies, the enabling of large-scale public corruption, among many other crimes.
Paul, why is it so difficult to tackle this offshore economy?
Well, it's really very difficult. I want to start off by saying what an incredible job ICIJ has done here. I mean, the only reason that we in government have any idea what's going on is because the free press is out there, peeling back the veil. And that's just absolutely extraordinary. So, I mean, kudos to the journalistic work done here. It's fantastic. And I do think it's going to have a policy impact. I want to highlight that what we're seeing here is money moving from dictatorships and struggling democracies to developed democracies. This is really about the enablers. So this is about the individuals in the West and developed democracies, lawyers, real estate professionals, trust and company service providers and the like, who basically provide these services to kleptocrats and to corrupt foreign officials to move their money to the West. And I guess I also want to emphasize that when you can use Western rule of law, you don't need to build the rule of law in your own country. So what you end up seeing is the perpetuation of dictatorship, the perpetuation of corruption abroad, because they can outsource their need for the rule of law and their desire for great schools and luxury real estate and so on and so forth, donations to museums and universities and so on and so on, to the West.
So if it's the rich and powerful, then, Paul, that are and many of these leading politicians, heads of state, that are benefiting from this offshore system, will there be less likely a desire to want to change the status quo? I mean, what is the solution? What is the answer to changing the taxation system to make it fairer for all?
You have to get rid of the offshore system. And I don't want to just frame this in tax. Right? This is an existential threat to democracy. This is a national security threat to the United States. It's a national security threat to all of our allies. It could easily end democracy. I mean, it really is the greatest threat we face today. I mean, when you have hundreds of billions unaccounted for, that affects politics, it affects rule of law, it affects all sorts of things, and it ultimately is behind so much polarization and the messiness of current democratic politics. So this is really a national security issue. Now, how do you get rid of the offshore system? Well, last Congress, and again, this was a reaction to so much of ICIJ's good work and so much of the reporting we saw, but last Congress we abolished, the United States, anonymous shell companies, which were behind so much money laundering. Now we're waiting for the implementation of that rule, so they're not gone yet, but they will be gone soon. Now, another big step is due diligence requirements for enablers. Now, if you are in the United States, only banks have to do any due diligence on their clients. Only banks. Lawyers do not. Real estate professionals do not. Consultants do not. Accountants do not, and so on and so forth. Investment advisors, nobody has to even ask if something is the proceeds of a crime. Someone arrives with, a suitcase full of cash. You don't even need to ask the question. So what we want is just for these individuals to ask very basic due diligence questions in order to protect the U.S. economy, in order to protect national security, in order to protect democracy.
And Dean, I mean, you spoke about the Panama Papers 5 years ago. We've now got the Pandora Papers. There have been several leaks. Regulators worldwide have started cracking down on the global money flows. But isn't it true that the rich and powerful simply find new ways to ring-fence their assets? I mean, what are you hoping to achieve from this investigation?
It's a fair question.
Go ahead. Sorry, I'm getting excited.
No worries.
To Dean.
I want to thank Paul for his kind words, and I think he's spot on in a couple of respects. Your question is, with all these leaks, we've been doing this for several years now: offshore leaks, Lux leaks, Swiss leaks, Panama Papers, Paradise Papers, and now Pandora Papers. And so, what's the point? Well, the point is actually Paul has gotten started on a fairly long list of reforms that are sort of underway. Now, it doesn't mean that reform will prevail or that the offshore system will continue as it will. What it does mean is that the battle has been joined on a global policy level. The OECD has come up with an agreement to try and impose a minimum global international tax on multinational corporations. We've already discussed this idea of trying to abolish secret shell companies and anonymous shell companies, and forcing providers to find out who the beneficial owners are. There's a lot more to do. What I think I'd also sort of echo what Paul said is this. This is definitely a creature of the West and Western finance. The West created it, and the West can turn it off too. The U.S. Treasury Department has enormous power that it could exercise tomorrow if it wanted to end offshore secrecy. It's okay for the Seychelles and British Virgin Islands to allow secrecy, but there's no rule that says U.S. banks have to process their dollar transaction. We could shut that off tomorrow, but we don't. So, and without that system, it's absolutely impossible to imagine the kind of large-scale kleptocracy that we sort of see in countries like Russia, Ukraine, elsewhere. If you are a kleptocrat and you stole a lot of money, you cannot keep it at home. You have to move it offshore. You have to move it out of your country, and the only way you can do that is through the dollar system. And with access to that dollar system, with U.S. banks in Lower Manhattan grinding through, processing trillions and trillions of dollars of transactions from anonymous shell companies, it's going to continue until they turn off that faucet.
Yeah, Paul, I mean, do you agree? And do you think that Dean and his fellow journalists have well and truly scratched the surface here, or could this just be the beginning?
Well, definitely it's the tip of the iceberg, right? We're seeing 0.00001% of the actual size of the offshore economy. I think there was a UN FACTI estimate that said it was about 10% of global GDP. And I mean, that's an extraordinary number. when you think about that, and that's of course just an estimate, because at the end of the day, we can't know. But the work that ICIJ does and that these journalists do is invaluable to understanding, to giving us a snapshot of what it looks like. Look, the good news here is that this issue has taken on a very strong sense of bipartisanship, that Democrats and Republicans are actually working together on this, despite what is otherwise a very polarized environment in the United States. There is now in Congress a caucus, so a member group against foreign corruption and kleptocracy. It's Democrats and Republicans. The President of the United States has declared countering corruption a national security interest of the United States. So corruption is a national security threat officially at the highest levels of government. That has never, ever happened before. So we are recognizing the truth that modern dictatorship, sort of the modern adversaries of democracy, rely on access to democracies. It's really the most perverse thing, but that's how it works in the 21st century, is that modern dictatorship relies on access to the West. So I want to kind of say that, look, corruption is part of human nature, but this scale, this level, is not inevitable. It doesn't need to be. Global kleptocracy is not inevitable, and we can get rid of it. And in 20 years from now, it could be gone. I mean, I totally agree that we built it and we can tear it down. Just because these adversaries, these kleptocrats have now co-opted it, doesn't mean we need to just sort of let it remain.
You make a good argument. Paul Massaro and Dean Starkman, thank you also to your team of journalists who obtained those files and sifted through them. Thanks to you both for joining us. Appreciate it.